Welcome back. I'm here today to talk about science fiction fantasy reviews, and this is a combination of frontlist and backlist titles, but particularly a lot of books that have been hyped online, especially here on YouTube, and today I'm here to weigh in with my opinion which ones are worth the hype. And I will argue that this is a really strong batch of books, but I'm going to discuss the fact that hype can really affect and possibly lead to disappointment, even if a book is really, really good to begin with. So I'm going to hopefully help to adjust your expectations with a couple of these titles so that you aren't left disappointed and actually enjoy these books. All that being said, let's get started. First, let's talk science fiction, starting with The Blighted Stars by Megan O'Keefe. This is a new science fiction series starter, so you definitely can start here. This author's also written the Protectorate series. I read the first book in that one, liked it, but didn't actually continue on. This is a book also that I've received for review from the publisher. And in the story, it's told over two main points of view. So we have a woman who's desperate and on the run, and she believes that there is a plot going on, and goes onto the ship to try to find out what is going on and has a reason to be there. They disguise themselves as a bodyguard, and the person that they are potentially or pretending to bodyguard for is this heir to a dynasty. You find out that he is very reluctant in his position. He doesn't really want this, but he's there because he was born into this role. Together they end up getting stuck together, and then the story goes from there, and they have to kind of lean on each other and come clean about what's all going on. This is a great setup to a new story. It's one that I like, and I feel similar to this one as I did with the first book in the Protectorate series, where it has pretty good characters. In terms of the world building and science fiction, I found it to be very accessible. So my main feelings about this book is the fact that I would have loved this book when I was first getting into science fiction because I found it to be very approachable. Obviously it's set in space and has those references to technology, but at the same time it's very easy to follow. You don't really need to understand how the science fiction works, and instead it's more the backdrop for a character-driven story that definitely is built around tension between these characters and hitting on some of the classic but familiar and likable tropes of science fiction. So if you're newer to sci-fi, I would absolutely recommend this one. If you love the author's previous work, you'll enjoy this one as well. I'm not quite sure how I feel about this series as a whole because really I need more. I need to see where it's going to go. But overall, a good start, a solid read, and I'm glad I got to check it out. Next, let's talk about Flight and Anchor, which is a firebreak novella. This is another one sent to me by the publisher, and this is one that is a companion set within the world. The publicist promised that I could read this one without having read the original novel, which I never end up getting a hold of. And I will say that it stands up on its own, but the problem is I have no idea how much more I would have gotten out of the story had I read the original novel. So the premise or setup to this one is that we follow these young children who have been trained in this military corps. And so at the beginning of the story, they're supposed to be going out on this military mission. They end up escaping and running into the city. So there's someone at a coffee shop who finds these young children and tries to help them. And then you find them or follow them as they are surviving within this city. This is one that I actually really enjoyed not knowing more about the original novel because it was so mysterious. You have these mysterious orphan-like children showing up, and you don't really know their background, you don't really know their story. So I would actually argue that this might be a great place to start if you're interested in the full-length novel, because I suspect, and again, I can't confirm this, but had I read the original novel, it probably would have answered a lot of the questions I had. But personally, my favorite thing about this novel was the mystery, the suspense. It reminded me of Elle from Stranger Things in season 1, if that appeals to you. It definitely gave me similar vibes, similar setup. And I just love, again, the idea of like children that are orphaned and having to survive and are being forced into situations they shouldn't. Like, it hits on a lot of the tropes that I find really appealing, and just, again, left me with a lot of questions because it's not a full novel. It is written as if you have already read the longer work. So I kind of had no idea what was going on, but at the same time it completely worked as its own story and was just a fast little read, and I had a lot of fun with it. So I'd recommend it, and if I can, I will try to check out the full-length novel now. And let's talk fantasy, starting with The Judas Blossom by Stefan Aryan. This is a book that I received for review from the publisher. This is a book that is set in Persia in the 1200s. It's told over 4 different points of view, one being the grandson of Genghis Khan. He is now the ruling warlord over the empire that Genghis Khan started. And then we also follow the perspective of his son, and then we also have 2 other perspectives that of course get tied in within the narrative. This is a book that is inspired heavily, as you can tell from that, set up by Mongolian culture, which happens to be a time period and culture that I find absolutely fascinating. I actually read this book right after finishing a historical fiction novel all about the coming of age story of Genghis Khan, which again is completely fictionalized, but drawing from real events. And so picking this up after that was a complete delight. This is a book I've seen hyped online everywhere. It had such a big marketing push, and not only that, but I also had several friends that were largely involved in the early push of this book. So they blurbed the book, they talked about it early on, and gave it glowing 5-star reviews. With all that, I was a little bit nervous to pick it up myself because I have been known to have some rather unpopular opinions, but the fact that it is Mongolian based, I knew there was very little chance I would hate it unless it was actually misrepresenting that time period. Ended up really enjoying this one. I thought the world building was lush and beautiful, and again, I'm not a historical fiction buff, but the little bit that I do know the real history, because I have read several books on Genghis Khan, I found those elements to be fantastic. I love the different points of view. The magic and fantasy elements of the story in my mind were kind of subtle, and I liked what it was doing. If I had a criticism or reflection on this book, it's simply the fact that it's such a setup book, or at least the world that is pulling from the time period. There is so much to take from that time period that this book did not feel long enough. I know there's more coming in this series, and I desperately want more because this book just felt a little bit too short, too tight. It's very fast paced. The narrative drive goes. And I just could have spent more time like with the food and the culture and just have chapters and chapters. I basically want something like the Dandelion Dynasty version of that, but for Mongolia. And this book is a little bit more tight and action-packed than I needed it to be, given the fact that I just adore this time period. So overall, I really like this book. I'm dying for more. I would really love to see the author take their time and draw this out into a longer series if the publisher will allow, because I think that this series and this story has so much potential. I really like this one. It is a case where the book was crazy hyped, and I do think that the hype is well deserved, but just know that in my mind, there is still more to come in this series, and I can't fully judge it until I get more of the story, which this one just left me kind of wanting more, which I have to wait for as always. I also read The Will of the Many by James Islington. This is a first book in a new fantasy series that is getting so hyped online. This is a story that follows a young man who is an incredible fighter in this world, almost like a gladiator style fighter. And then within the story, he gets the opportunity to go to a magic fighting school and learn his craft. You find out that there is multiple reasons that he's there. He's being sent there because there is a mystery and he's trying to figure out what is going on. So I love the premise of the story. I do just overall love stories that are set in a fantasy school setting, and so any kind of book set in that setting will always get points for me. This is one that I really overall enjoyed. If I didn't mention, it's set in a world that's very much inspired by ancient Rome. And so again, you have the gladiator fights, more of a traditional older style of speech, and it made for a really interesting narrative. And then within the story, there are different classes or levels that the characters are trying to reach. I have read this author before. I read their debut novel, and while I liked it, I didn't think it was interesting or unique enough for me to continue on and read that original series. But I was happy when I picked up this one to find that their writing style, in my opinion, has really gone up a level. I felt this one was very well polished. The characters were more dynamic and interesting, and the world itself, again, felt very lush and mature and gritty and all the things that I like to see in a book. I definitely was encouraged to pick up this book because of Patrick's review. He gushed about online, and I've seen other people also name this as one of their favorite books of the year. But since then, I know that Mike has put out a book review on his channel, and my thoughts most closely line up with his. This is a fantastic book. It's 4 stars. It's solid. It's easily one of the best fantasy books that I've read that's been published this year. But is it one of the best books I've ever read, a new all-time favorite? No, it's a good start to a series. It's a really solid start. It is a very polished book that I think will land on a lot of people's favorite books of the year. But I don't think it's actually doing anything we haven't read before. I've seen several people compare it to things like Red Rising, which I haven't read, so I can't make that comparison myself. But I know these tropes. I've seen them before. They're very well done, but there's nothing I haven't seen before. It's just a very polished version of a lot of tropes that I and a lot of readers really like. So I 100% still encourage you to go pick it up. But again, just know that this book is good, but in my mind, it's not quite as good as everyone's saying it is. It's more like, again, Mike and I seem to be the two online that are agreeing that it's really good, but it's still a book. Next is The Combat Codes by Alexander Darwin, another book I received for review from the publisher. This is one that is set in a world where all the nations have agreed not to use weapons of mass destruction. Instead, they fight with hand-to-hand or close combat. And so within the story, there is this proclaimed warrior who has been amazing until they have this defeat. And then there is also this young man who is training or fighting in these underground rings. And this great man sees his potential and calls him to come and go to a combat school and learn the trade properly. So this is a book that I would recommend to those of you that love action-based martial arts fantasy stories. And I definitely love those elements. I'm not always someone who loves fantasy that's very action-packed, but I do love it when it's more intimate, again, when it's more like hand-to-hand or close range combat rather than like wide sweeping battles. Sometimes I can get lost in the larger logistics, but in a setting like this, it very much appealed to me. And as you can tell from the premise of that story, this also has a magic school or fantasy school setup, which is something I love. I cannot get enough of that trope. I know it's done over and over again, but it works well here. And again, it's not a Harry Potter type of school. Instead, it's much more focused on the physical training aspects. So there's a lot of hard work. And again, I'm not someone who actually does a great job of visualizing what I'm reading. So having an author who can really spell out to me how the martial arts combat is working in a way that works with my limited brain was such a delight. So overall, great start to a series. I would love to see more from this. I do know there's more to come. And it was just really fun. Probably gave me slight vibes of some of the fighting in the Greenbone Saga series. So if you're looking for something like that, that again is more of kind of intimate fighting rather than large battlefields with thousands of warriors, this was really unique and fun and definitely want more. Next, I read Be Sure by Seanan McGuire, which is a bind-up of the first 3 novellas in the Wayward Children series. I have read the most recent one that came out this year because I got an ARC, but I want to go all the way back to the beginning and start with the first stories. These novellas are all centered around the idea that there are children who go through portals, and they go through different portals to different fantasy worlds, and then this series deals with what happens when those children come home. They come back changed, their parents do not understand them anymore, and so they send them away to this school to get rid of them, to get them fixed, and there we deal with them. So that's the premise of the first book, and so we have someone who is going to the school, trying to find their place. The series in general, and this is with all of Seanan McGuire's work, deals heavily with topics of diversity. So I love how this portal fantasy series really ties in with a lot of acceptance surrounding queer identities and the idea that parents just think that there's something wrong with their kid and want to get it fixed. And this book is very much affirming, especially the first one deals heavily with that aspect, and just identifying that these portal fantasies are not changing their children, but helping them to actually find their true self. So very heavy plot and presence in the story. I love the representation for ace, trans, and other sexual identities, etc. in the story. So that was the first book, which in my opinion is the strongest of the first of the 3 bind-up. Then we have a story that focuses on 2 of the twins and gives their backstory. It definitely has some good elements, but it didn't hold my attention quite as much. And then the third story deals with a person in a larger body who goes off to a land with sweets. And I love how this book deals with acceptance of all body types and really fights against fat phobia, topics that I personally really love to see in fiction. So I love those aspects to it. But there is something about the first book that really held my attention the most, just because it was such an innovative, creative idea. And then the other books, as you can imagine, are kind of building off of there. There are still some books that I haven't read in this series, so if I do get a chance, I would love to get a hold of the novellas and read them. But overall, I do recommend this. If you have read a lot of portal fantasy, this is one you might want to check out, because I think it will most appeal to those of you that already have read things like Narnia and are looking for something that is almost a commentary on those type of books and kind of reflecting back in a smart way while also reflecting on society and giving that social commentary that I really enjoy in my fiction. And finally, I got a chance to read the Liza, Loch, LAmour by Scott Lynch, as well as its 2 sequels. And this is a series that was so beloved on BookTube. It was super hyped, but has really gone down in popularity because of the fact that the author has not published a book in over 10 years now, I believe. And so because the series is unfinished, a lot of people are really shying away from it. If you don't know, this series follows a young man named Lamora, who is an orphan and gets pulled into this group of thieves, and he is trained to basically hone his thieving skills and follow the direction of his master. Within the story, he befriends another young man, and they have a great romance that is throughout the series. They have adventures and heists, and the book is set in a very gritty world where dark things happen, where terrible things happen to people. And so the premise of this book is quite dark, But because of the humor and banter, especially between the main characters, this book and the series actually feels quite light. So it's kind of a balance where the world is dark, but then we have a lighter perspective, which definitely alleviates some of the heaviness to it. The part I want to mention to readers who haven't read the series yet is that it's relatively episodic. The first book could absolutely be treated as a standalone if you just want to stop there, or you could read the first 2 books and stop there. I would argue the first 2 are probably the strongest. The second book didn't quite hold my attention the same way I would have liked it to, but overall, it was a really enjoyable ride. And if there are more books written in the series, I will absolutely read them. I really enjoyed the series, gave them all 4 stars. But in terms of the larger narrative, it's kind of one where you kind of follow the characters through a different plot. So I kind of feel like I'm watching either episodes of a TV show, something like that. And so if we get more episodes, if we get another season, 100% I will read it. But I don't need that to feel like I have a complete experience with these characters. I'm not left with the characters hanging off of a cliff at the end of book 3. So there definitely is room for growth, but I found these books to be overall quite satisfying in themselves. I love the humor, the banter, and just overall really fun. I do enjoy heist stories. It's a little bit lighter than some of the things I normally read, but did I have a really good time with it? Absolutely. I'm so glad I wasn't scared away by the fact that the series is unfinished, because I had a great time reading them, and for me it's all about the journey, not the destination. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know, of the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And I'd also love to hear, what is a series or a book where it was actually a really good book, but you felt like the hype was so impossibly high that it perhaps detracted from some of your enjoyment of the series or book? Love to hear your thoughts and comments down below. If you're new to my channel, hopefully you want to stick around and subscribe. I also read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, fantasy. And if you want to help me out with this video, you can give me a thumbs up, drop a comment, even if it's just an emoji, like a fantasy emoji, I don't know, dragon, wizard, that's all I got. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.